Before we talk about lexical relations, it may help to talk about some terminology. First, let's talk about the term lexical relation itself. This is a term that describes a relationship between two entries that have equal status with each other. That is, neither one is subsidiary to the other. In later lessons, we'll talk about relationships where one entry is subsidiary to the other. Now, in lexicography, the term lexical relation is a technical term, and it refers to certain specific kinds of relationships, including synonym, antonym, hypernym, and some other terms. Now, in Flex, we use the term to refer to those relationships also, but it has a bit broader meaning. In Flex, we're looking at the practical outworkings of creating a link between two entries, and that could be for a relationship that fits in that standard category, or it might be some other relationship between entries. For instance, the relationship between a noun and the noun classifiers that go with it is not normally considered a lexical relation in lexicography, but in Flex, the lexical relation function is an effective way to model that. So keep that in mind, that there's a slight difference there. In Flex, the lexical relationship is usually at the sense level between two entries. That is, the sense of one entry is related to the sense of another entry. It's almost always sense to sense. But the user can configure the relationship and make it so that it can be a relationship from a sense to an entry, or from a sense to either an entry or a sense. Now, once you have a lexical relation connection set up, if you want to format it, you go to the Configure Dictionary tool, and it's configured at the sense level. That's really important to remember, at the sense level in the lexical relations node. If you want to configure the properties of the relationship, like the name or abbreviation or what level it applies to, you need to go to the lists area and go to the lexical relations list. So that's a description of the term lexical relation. Now let's look at another term. There's a term cross-reference. This is very similar to lexical relation because it is a relationship between two entries that have the same status. Neither one is subsidiary to the other. But the difference between this and lexical relation is that it's usually between two entries. It's at the entry level. Now again, the user can configure it in Flex so that it can go from an entry to either an entry or sense. But normally it's entry to entry. Now, to format it, it's important to remember that this is at the entry level. So when we're in the Configure Dictionary dialog, we need to go to the entry level and look for the cross-references node. For lexical relations, we look for the lexical relations node at the sense level. For cross-reference, we look for the cross-references node at the entry level. And this includes other relationships that the user may define that are also entry to entry, even if the user has given it a name other than cross-references. You still go to the cross-references node. Now, if you want to adjust the properties of this relationship, maybe make a new entry-to-entry relationship or with a different name, or adjust the abbreviation, then the place to configure it is also in the list area, and it is also in the lexical relations list. Now, normally lexical relations are at the sense level, but in the lists area, that one list is used for all of the relationships that are between two peer entries with the same status. So whether the relationship is entry to entry or sense to sense, in the lists area, it's configured in the lexical relations list. Now let's look at one more term. The term reference is kind of a catch-all term. It's a generic term that refers to when one entry mentions a different entry. And so when you have a reference, there's two parts to it. One is the label describing what the relationship is, and the other is the word that is at the other end of this reference. So, for instance, if an entry says, I have an antonym that is something else, cold might say, I have an antonym hot. Antonym is the name of the relationship, and hot is the target. Now, this is not the entry for hot. It's telling you you can go look at the entry for hot to see a word that's related to this. So in the reference, That word is called the target. Now, in Flex and on Webinary, when you have a reference, something between two entries, it's usually a live link. And so what that means is that in the formatted entry, if you click on the target word, it will jump you to that actual entry for that word. Keep in mind that that's just a reference to it in this entry, but this is a way to go to the actual entry for it. Now, again, this is a generic term. It can be used for lexical relations, but we will see that it can also be used for other kinds of relationships. Later on, we'll see that the term reference can apply when we have variants or when we have complex forms or when we have reversal entries. So reference is just a generic term that talks about when one entry mentions a different entry.